Hey guys, this is Hell Hades. This is a Raid Shadow Legends video. Guys, this is the last or third, I guess, in a series of how to use the Optimizer and how to do certain builds. This is still relevant if you're not an Optimizer user, but definitely makes more and more sense if you are, because I'm going to show you some of the tools that we've built into the Optimizer to help you do this more successfully. But this one's about tanks or about champions that are just going to be built to stay alive as well as possible. So we're going to go onto the Optimizer and look at the ability to build a champion. I think we're going to go with, I guess Vodoff's a good one here. Vodoff. We're going to go with the survival mode. So I've already done a video about balance mode. I've done a video about the damage mode. Now we're going to talk about survival mode. Again, if you're on the Optimizer, you'll be able to just use remote optimization. But if you're on your PC, this is the mode for tanks or for people that you just want to build with like a specific stat and then throw all of the rest of the stats into survivability. So you click your survival mode. You then start to go through the tabs. And on this page here, when you're looking at artifacts, you can either say include equipped artifacts. That will look at items that are on champions that you own. If you lock champions within the Optimizer, you see every champion's got this lock mechanic. If you lock champions, then you can actually say include artifacts on locked champions as well. If you're looking for a particular gear set, let's call it stone skin, you could say include artifacts from champions that have got that gear set irrelevant of their lock status with this one. So I'm going to say include my locked artifacts as well. And then down the bottom here, you've got all the masteries that are currently on that champion. If you want a theory craft, you could be like, well, you know what, I'm building a tank now. So the final mastery I'm going to want, I don't know, is Elixir of Life rather than War Master or whatever. Yeah. So you'd be looking at masteries that build more stats onto your champions. I'll go through the mastery stuff in a bit more detail towards the end of this video. You then go into optimize. Again, you can choose your enemy. So you could say, who am I up against? What type of champion? Or you can go, what type of boss do I want to fight? And be quite specific around what you're going to do. I don't think it's as relevant for tanks, but it's definitely more relevant for the damage builds when you're doing this stuff. We then go into the stats. And so with EHP, basically what this means is it's going to give you as much, the right balance of health and defense to stay alive. So actually, you could put no minimum or maximums in here if you wanted to, and it would start to find you stuff. But the more detail you give the Optimizer, the better it becomes. So what I would say here is, for most people, there's a stat you probably want. Yeah. So if your tank needs to actually have turns, let's say Vodoff, I want to have turns, but relatively slow. I'd say, right, minimum speed 170. In most of the different ways of using the Optimizer, putting a minimum speed in is useful. The next thing I would do is look to see, does this champion have any abilities I want to actually land? So Vodoff does have things like provokes and stuff. So, okay, I'm going to put minimum accuracy in there of 230. And I might also say I want him to be able to resist any debuffs coming at me. So we're going to go high, minimum resistance at 450. Every other stat now that the Optimizer tries to find is going to be around tank stats. At this point here, if you want to hand select an item from your gear, for example, a particular ring or amulet, you can do that and then just untick the amulet on this box. But if you want the Optimizer to find everything, you leave that ticked. And then this is where I'd say it's probably the EHP build is probably the most relevant for picking out a gear set, because it might be that you want particularly Stone Skin, Immortal, Bolster. Bolster would be a very good one for a tank one. Shield set, Stalwart gear, Defiant gear. All of these gear sets which enable you to be more tanky because of their passive abilities. So I'm going to say, have a look for me for Defiant gear. Be interesting. I might not even have good enough gear to do this, but we'll try. And I want to have at least 2 sets of Defiant gear. So we then go through. Do I have any glyphs? Well, I look in game and I say, okay, what have I got in terms of glyphs here? What glyphs have I actually got available? In accuracy, I could add, call it 8. In resistance, I could add, call it 8 again. Health, probably 5. Yeah, so this is what I'm doing. I'm saying, what glyphs can I realistically put on people, make this work? And then I'm like, right, so speed, I could probably add a couple. Accuracy, I could add about 8 on average. Resistance, I could add about 8 on average. HP and defense, we've thought about 5. Throw those in. And this is going to make quite an impact in terms of the build that you're going to find. If you don't have glyphs, you just leave this blank, by the way. Yeah, if you don't want glyphs. Also, if you're thinking about theory crafting, you might throw in the highest possible glyphs to see what the best possible build you could do would be. So we then go through, we hit start, and it's going to start searching your gear. So EHP builds are notorious for being the slowest builds on the optimizer. On a mobile, we've capped out the search time at 2 minutes. So if you've got other stuff to do, get it rolling, go and do something else, come back in a couple of minutes, and in the history tab on mobile, you'll find your build. If you're doing it on a PC like I am here, normally by the time that you've got to like 15% progress, it would have already found a really good build. And at that point, you can just hit pause. It will stop searching for you, okay? And then I can actually start to look at the builds that have come back. I can view it as a list in the top right here. And I could be like, right, let's start to look at the difference between these. So I've got my resistance I wanted. I've got my minimum speed. I've got my minimum accuracy that I needed. And then the rest of the stats, as I said, were just being pumped into health and defense in equal measure based on survivability. That's what EHP is, survivability. So when I hit view, I can then see exactly where those pieces are, and I can go and equip them on my champion. So then you get to the point where it's like, okay, well, let's look at the EHP number here. This is my effective health points. This is how tanky I am. So compared to the build he's wearing right now, which is a 377607 EHP number, we're going to gain 24% more tankiness. Okay, so what I can do is I can just clear and say, well, what does that look like if I don't do Defiant, but I do Stalwart, for example? Optimize again, start the running. And this is how I use the Optimizer. I'm basically like, if I'm looking at a build for a specific champion for a specific area of the game, I'll do a number of kind of reiterations until I find the one that I want in different kind of gear sets. So I'll let this one run through for a couple of minutes, and then I'll show you the results here. So in Stalwart gear, I actually get a pretty similar numbers actually. Yeah, so there's no real benefit either way around which way to go for survivability for me. And again, I could easily clear, go back in to sets and be like, okay, well, what about if I was doing stone skin? You know, what if he was more used for arena or wave-based content rather than kind of boss modes? So stone skin, but I want him to have 6 pieces, optimize, start again. And again, it's going to be running through my optimizations. Actually done that one very quick. Way higher EHP in stone skin. So I've got better stone skin gear available here. And you can see I've got a higher health pool, higher defense pool, while still hitting the rest of my stats. And again, if I did it side by side, I could kind of choose the one I want to do for that as well. So survivability, as I say, it's mainly for tanks, but there's actually a lot of different tank options, because it might be that you want someone in Hydra to go at a certain speed, but then the rest of their stats are just keeping you alive. Because someone like a Mithral or someone like a Duchess, actually, if you just use them to keep your team alive, they don't really need a whole load of damage in stats. That's where EHP becomes very strong. So yeah, lots of boss encounters, that type of thing. EHP becomes a stat you want. Regen sets when you're trying to build solo champions. Like if I was trying to build a solo Bad L, for example, you might kind of come in, grab Bad L, be like, oh yeah, what did people say in those builds? So we would go survival mode, but then you'd just be thinking, right, in those builds that people talk about, what are their main masteries? So could well be extra accuracy, for example, or extra resistance. Probably extra resistance, I would think. Not the crit and stuff, although it could be. But it might be over here like this. Yeah, and more Law of Steel. So it might be some of these type of masteries. When you're doing your build, you're like, right, well, they tell me I need at least 250 speed. I need at least 350 resistance. I need to land my kits. And then everything else goes into EHP. But everyone seems to build him in, I don't know, regen, for example. Probably wouldn't for him, but this is the type of builds that you see for solo champions. Hit the optimize, hit start, and then again, it's gonna take a little while to do it, but it will start to find builds which you want. Again, if you see something which already feels good, you can just hit the pause, grab the build, and just crack on, build it out. And again, here we've got our regen set, we've got the accuracy we needed, the resistance we needed, the speed we wanted, and then all of the other stats have been punched into gaining us survivability. So in game then, if we're looking at building our tanks, let's just go through, if you weren't using the optimizer, the type of gear pieces that you're going to look for. So if I think of my Duchess here, who is built pretty damn tanky, generally we're looking for HP or defense % on gloves. Again, it needs to be a balanced build. like survivability in raid is mainly about balance. But if you're looking at arena, HP tends to be the better stat to push. If you're looking at PvE content, then a nice blend of defense and HP tends to be the way to go. But you can see here we've got HP on the gloves, could be defense as well. And then you're looking for those extra stats that you want. So if it's resistance, speed, more defense, more HP, all in the stats. Same sort of thing on the chests. If you're looking for a resistance build, you might have resistance as your main stat. And depending on whether you want to be fast or just a tank, you would either go speed on the boots or defensive stats again on the boots and stuff. Equally, in all of the accessories here, they're all going to be defense-based type accessories or HP-based. The only difference to that is if you've got someone who needs to land abilities, you might still go with your accuracy banner. In terms of masteries, it totally depends on the type of champion you're trying to build. Yeah, so someone like a Duchess, my main mastery I've got here is timely intervention because I want her to get back to her abilities as quick as possible. But normally for tanks, it will be either resistance, it might be that you go for Iron Skin for the extra defense. Bulwark's pretty common for like tanky champions to take damage away from other champions in your team. This will only work on one of your champions. There's no point having two people with Bulwark in the same team. If it's someone that you need to build high accuracy with, you might take Eagle Eye. But generally, it's support and defense tree for the tank-based champions. And then if we look at blessings, again, it totally depends what you're trying to do, honestly. But, you know, Temporal Chains here has got good defensive stats and good active abilities for people that perhaps would revive as tanks. If I look at my Vogoth, do I have a blessing on Vogoth? I think I do. Commanding Presence, so this is just buffing the team's aura. Not necessarily a tank one, to be fair. Someone who's a kind of tanky healer, like Godseeker here, take a Miracle Heal on to get back some of my lost HP. So there's quite a lot of options, actually. Let's go through a few others as well. What else might I pick? I will say, actually, since they've changed it, where is it? The other one, which for PvE content, Brimstone's great because it gives you defensive stats, but it also gives you smite, so a way of doing damage even though you're a tank. And Polymorph as well is just a great arena defensive kind of tank one. So it gives you all of those tanky stats, but also if people are trying to debuff you, then they can be sleeped. The other set, actually, which is worth calling out right now for tanky type of champions, but those that do buffs, since they changed protection set, this is now brilliant if you're buffing your team and you don't really want to do damage yourself. Protection set kind of becomes this new tank stroke speedy set that is also enabling you to protect the buffs you put on your team. So, you know, someone like a Sifi that wants to be quite tanky, fast, but also will protect all of the buffs you're putting out on other people in your team. So there you go, guys. That's how to build yourself some great tanks. I've been Hell Hades. I'll see you later.